Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're jumping right into an incredibly intense and frankly fascinating analysis drawn straight from a series of internal documents, strategy sessions, and public presentations. We're going to impartially unpack the explosive allegations made by tech founder Kyle McLean-Smith. He lays out a deeply complex framework detailing what he believes is the absolute weaponization of the Canadian legal system against him. Now, this isn't just your standard legal dispute. His claims bridge macro-level geopolitical theories with deeply personal micro-level court battles. It's a compelling look at where public activism meets massive bureaucratic power. Let's get right to it.
I want to start things off by posing a pretty provocative question, one that really underpins his entire perspective. Can the legal system actually make you an outlaw? When we hear the word outlaw, our brains usually go straight to historical bandits or Wild West train robbers, right? But Kyle's framework asks us to consider something much more modern and systemic. What if an immense, coordinated legal bureaucracy can actually turn a citizen into a political refugee in their own country? It is a heavy concept for sure, but it's the exact lens through which we need to view his claims.
So, here's our roadmap to navigate his narrative today. First, the modern outlaw. Second, Fairy Creek in retaliation. Third, the divorce industrial complex. Fourth, Canada's property rights void. And finally, number 5, the charter challenge strategy.
Part 1. The modern outlaw.
Okay, so how exactly does Kyle define his current reality? Well, according to his perspective, he isn't just a tech founder dealing with a tough legal break. He alleges severe state-level corruption within major institutions. In the source material, he firmly believes and explicitly states that powerful intelligence agencies, specifically naming the RCMP and the CIA, are actually part of a state-sponsored targeting campaign against him. He describes enduring years of deep psychological operations, or psyops, that fundamentally compromised his family and stripped him of his sovereignty. Effectively, he argues this rendered him a political refugee fighting against deep, systemic forces.
Part 2. Fairy Creek and retaliation.
To understand the catalyst for these claims, we really have to look at his timeline. I mean, how does a tech innovator suddenly find himself at odds with state intelligence and billionaires? The source materials point directly to a specific pivot. Before 2020, Kyle was operating as a tech founder and innovator, but between 2020 and 2021, he became heavily involved in the massive Fairy Creek protests in British Columbia, which was literally one of the largest acts of civil disobedience in Canadian history. He describes himself as a thought leader in liberty during these protests, and according to his framework, this public activism was the exact moment power brokers, including Canadian authorities and well-connected billionaires, decided to punish his political stance. He claims they used their asymmetric knowledge and power to make an example of him, leading directly to the present day, where he alleges the family court system was completely weaponized to liquidate his assets.
This extreme financial and emotional toll is vividly illustrated by a direct quote from his records. "I sold my condo for $10,000 so that I could speak to Emily's mother. I didn't have a lawyer to hand over my part of our condo." He explains that he was completely locked out of his own assets and forced to represent himself against a highly sophisticated, well-funded opposition. In his view, the courts didn't care at all that he had no legal representation or funds. Instead, he argues the system was actively used by these elite actors to enforce his submission and punish him for his political thought leadership.
Part 3. The divorce industrial complex. This brings us to the specific machinery he claims was used by these geopolitical forces to break him down financially and personally. Kyle contrasts how courts are supposed to work with what he actually experienced. On one side, we have ideal due process, which is supposed to be this hopeful social contract focused on finding the truth and ensuring fairness for everyone. But on the flip side is what he identifies as legal formalism. In his framework, legal formalism is a strict, rigid adherence to procedural rules that is actively weaponized. He claims these rules are purposefully used to obscure the truth, intentionally drain the opposing party's resources, and coerce outcomes. He cites examples like being forced to perform complex legal duties remotely under extreme duress, being physically locked out of his home, and even facing threats of jail time from a judge.
So the crucial point here is that Kyle defines this entire apparatus as the divorce industrial complex. He views it not as a system for conflict resolution, but as a profit-driven machine designed to extract capital from vulnerable families. According to his specific analysis, this complex actively weaponizes a lack of family support safety nets. Basically, if you're isolated, you're an easy target. He argues it completely disregards severe psychological trauma, heavily penalizes anyone outside standard socioeconomic norms, and, in what is arguably his most intense allegation, operates essentially as domestic abuse scaled by the state itself.
7. That is the number of years Kyle states he has endured this reality. 7 years of being stripped of resources, castrated from his community, and subjected to what he calls a cascading bureaucratic failure of access to justice. It's a staggering time frame of what he considers continuous, state-level punishment.
Part 4. Canada's property rights void.
So you might be wondering, how is it legally possible to be completely stripped of your assets in this manner? During their strategic research, Kyle's team highlighted a surprising piece of history that most people don't even realize. Fundamental property rights were actually left out of the Canadian Constitution back in the 1980s. It was the result of a political compromise at the time. Kyle attributes his total loss of assets directly to this literal constitutional void. In his view, a country operating without entrenched constitutional property rights is running on a fundamentally flawed legal operating system.
Without these entrenched rights, Kyle argues that citizens are left entirely exposed. This void creates extreme vulnerability, providing a massive loophole for bad actors, billionaires, and corrupt systems to completely strip individuals of their wealth and sovereignty. He vividly describes the current legal environment as a house of mirrors, a subjective, precarious system relying on chaotic rulings rather than objective, ironclad protections. It's this exact structural loophole that he claims enabled the unchecked asset stripping he experienced as retaliation for his Fairy Creek activism.
Part 5. The Charter Challenge Strategy.
So how does one man theoretically fight back against the deeply entrenched laws of an entire nation? His foundational strategy relies on a fascinating game theory concept called a Schelling point. It represents a highly visible focal point where society will naturally rally and coordinate behavior even without direct communication. He intends to create this Schelling point by marrying two completely different legal philosophies: American textualism, which relies on a strict reading of legal text, with Canada's living tree doctrine, which is the idea that a constitution is organic and must adapt to new realities over time.
To execute this, he outlines 3 highly ambitious steps. Step 1, anchor his personal grievances not just in standard family law, but in historical, foundational civil rights like the Magna Carta. Step 2, secure a specialized, fearless legal team willing to directly take on the federal government. And Step 3, launch a massive charter challenge. Now, in Canada, a charter challenge is a legal mechanism used to strike down laws that violate constitutional rights. He wants to use this as a highly visible icebreaker case to finally graft ironclad property rights into the Canadian framework and force systemic accountability onto the geopolitical actors he claims targeted him.
I want to leave you with this final, provocative thought regarding the fragility of legal standing, as outlined in Kyle's complex framework. If the very foundation of your property rights is missing from the legal code, how secure is anyone against the immense retaliatory weight of systemic power? It is a question that really forces us to look closely at the invisible structures governing our lives. Thank you for joining us for this explainer, and keep questioning the systems around you.